hopefully get plenty of other people contributing as well. So I'm going to take you through, to begin with, our theory of change. So we're going to look a little bit at the driver diagram that we sent out to everybody at the start of this work, but what I really want us to do today is to think together about how we might update that driver diagram now that we've come to the end of this collaborative, because there'll be different things that people have been working on. It won't necessarily have been the areas that we expected people to focus on that have taken on the most significance, and so what I'd really like is for people to sort of contribute as much as they possibly can into helping us make a sort of updated, iterated version of that driver diagram that we can then use as an output at the end of this collaborative for sharing more widely with other people who across the country and across sort of the different sort of geographicals, but will be able to take on and adopt some of the work that you've trialed as part of this collaborative. So it's really important, I think, that we find a way to kind of update that meaningfully in a way that will help people who want to try and do this work going forward, because I know that the driver diagram we started with was actually, it was enormous. There were so many different areas and so many different domains that we were looking at, and I don't think everybody's focused sort of intently on each of those domains, and so it would be good to narrow that down into something that was a bit more meaningful and achievable for people who might go on to do this work. So that would be really helpful. And then if we have the time, and I'm not sure we will, but if we do have the time, we'll move on to thinking a bit about not necessarily the specific change ideas that you've implemented, but also the differences that you're seeing on your ward as a result of being part of this collaborative. So you'll be seeing changes in the way that your staff respond to instances. You'd be seeing changes in the way that patients feel about their safety on the ward. There'll be all sorts of small but important cultural shifts that you're seeing, and what we really want to do is get you thinking about those and thinking about how you sort of sell this work going forward, so when you're looking at spreading it across your trusts and more widely. So so that's something that will help you to start thinking about as well today, if we get the time. But I think for the moment we want to help people sort of think a bit about what they've actually put into place and changed. It's quite difficult, I think, sometimes to keep a hold of the significant changes that you have made, and particularly given how challenging the circumstances have been for you over the course of this collaborative with COVID, etc. It's not always easy to sort of summarize that and to think for yourself about, you know, all the achievements you've made. So that's going to be our focus today, I hope. I'm going to share my screen with you. So Renata, thank you for sharing the slides, but we can stop sharing those now, and I'll share my screen. If I can just get it sorted. So, and I've got a presentation that I'm going to ask you to contribute to in terms of the driver diagram in our theory of change. So first of all, sorry, I need to share the link with you, which I will do in the chat now. Bear with me, sorry. So you should have a link now that means that you'll be able to interact with this presentation as we go through it. I'll talk you through it though, so there's no requirement to do anything just yet. So yeah, I'm going to present the driver diagram that we started with. As I said, it's as I mentioned, it's huge. So it's got a number of primary drivers, a number of secondary drivers, and you won't necessarily have tested ideas in relation to each of these drivers. But what I hoped we would do is think about the ones that have been more significant for a number of people on the collaborative, and the things that you might be able to add to that so that we can update it. So this here shows you our aim, which of course was to increase the percentage of service users and staff who feel safe from sexual harm within mental health and learning disability services. And these here are the primary drivers that we focused on at the start. So this was your sort of starting point or template, and of course you'll have done lots of different things in relation to some of these, but then there may be some that you didn't look at particularly. So we've got record incidents and analyse data, respond to sexual safety incidents, collaborate with other organisations, access to resources and education, staff support, training and availability. Sorry, I can't actually see my whole screen with everything else. Improve the culture and understand and respond to the needs of the individual. And then beyond that, there were a number of secondary drivers that linked to each of those. Now, what I wondered if we could do today, and I'm going to facilitate the discussion as we go along, is on these slides where I've put up a secondary driver, which was co-produced agreement visible to all, and that you can see at the top of the screen relates to access to resources and education. Can you, if you've got the link and it works, enter the change ideas that you think you tested in relation to this particular driver? So you'll see that if you type in to a speech bubble, it should appear on the screen. You should be able to see that. This is a bit of a test because obviously I haven't been able to test it with everybody prior to this, but one of the things I know that everybody, yeah, exactly. I mean, the reason I put this one up first is because I know that one of the things we mandated across the collaborative from the start is the ward charter that people co-produced very often with patients on the ward. We gave you a template that you could adapt. And you've done it in different ways. So there are a number of teams who have done that by co-producing it with young people on the ward, turning it into something more easy read or visual. But also, as somebody's put up there, thank you, sexual safety leaflets have been something that a number of wards have worked on as well, and shared, which might be part of the admission process. They are given to sort of patients throughout, and that's sort of certainly increased awareness and things. So thank you. I hope you can see. Can everybody see the ideas that are being put up on that screen? Is it clear? Okay, great. Thank you. So we've got a number of different ideas and ways that you've adapted it. So you created an advisory group to support the project, created a ward charter of sexual safety leaflets and posters. I know that one of my wards, which was a CAMS ward, it was Marlborough House in Oxford, they created a little pocket version of the ward charter and a leaflet that they could give to residents on admission as well, so they had that easily accessible, etc. So one of the things I'd sort of want to encourage you to do today, rather than me just talk through what you're putting up here, but if there's anything that comes up on the screen where you think, oh, that's interesting, would somebody mind sharing a bit more about that? Please raise your hand or ask that question in the chat, or let people know if you'd like to know more about any of their ideas. We want not only for this to be useful for us to provide an output for the collaborative, we also want it to be a useful process for you to go through this today as part of the workshop, and giving you an opportunity to talk to people about some of the ideas that you might see on these boards. Does anybody have any questions on any of those or anything they'd like to ask? Okay, we'll move on. So I used that one first because it was, you can go back, I think, at your own pace and add things in if you've not had a chance to do it as we move along. But the next one was, I haven't gone in order. If you know the driver diagram, it's not necessarily in chronological order. I've gone in the order of things that I know people to be testing a lot around. So the particular drivers that I know people are doing a lot of work on. So in terms of improving culture on your ward, there's been lots and lots of work around openness to talk about sexual safety, relationships and sexual behaviours. So I think, as I've talked about before in various events, I think this was something that we really underestimated at the start of this work. We didn't realise, I think we knew it was going to be new, and we knew that people would need to think very differently about sexual safety on wards, but I don't think we quite anticipated how difficult it might be, or just how much of a challenge it might be to sort of raise that awareness more widely, to get people on board with the project, to really get people thinking differently about some of this stuff. And I think, you know, that's not a criticism by any means. It's the culture on our mental health wards has been a particular way for a very, very long time, and there is a lot of belief that you know, the way that people are treated or people behave on a ward is part of the process. It's just part of the job. It's part of being unwell, and there wasn't a lot of understanding of how to sort of talk sensitively about that or deal with those incidents necessarily. So I think one of the things that people will see as a result of this work is that understanding has really changed culturally, that there's a real shift in that. So we've got a lot of people who've done things, thank you for putting this in here, a lot of people who've done things around young people's health and well-being, or even just health and well-being groups more generally, sexual health clinics, linking up with some of those wider physical health side of things as well, and that's, you know, that kind of holistic looking at a person and their needs more broadly is obviously a really positive thing. Does anybody want to talk about any of those particular ideas that have come up? And I don't know if you can see them all actually once you get a few more. So there'll be lots of crossover as well with this particular driver, where it's about openness to talk about sexual safety, because there'll be things like, you'll see that there's supervision, reflective practice, that kind of thing. So you'll see that some of the change ideas you might put into this driver will also link to other drivers on the driver diagram as well. When we pull this all together as a final output, we'll make those links as well. But Carol, you've mentioned in the chat incorporating inpatients one-to-one sheets, so I can add that into that as well. We'll make sure we add that in as well. Okay. So there's lots of forums in which you've kind of started bringing sexual safety in, and lots of things that have really changed. Anybody, was that somebody going to say something? Or? I'm interested in whoever put this one in, a standing teaching session for staff during their 2-week.
Kate, you're on mute.
I got muted by somebody, apparently. I don't know who. I don't blame you for having enough of me. Can someone else speak? I was saying, I was asking about the teaching session, this idea that had been posted on this board about during the 2-week CAMS induction.
Hi Kate, that was me.
Hi.
I'm Ellie from SLAM.
Thanks, Ellie. Did we say a bit more about that?
So we have a 2-week CAMS induction for all staff, starting with then our CAMS inpatient services. So one of the sessions is about kind of introducing this project, also looking at kind of key definitions, how you record on DATEX, looking at the support that's already in place for both staff and young people should they experience any difficulties around this. And then we spend the rest of the time looking at different scenarios of incidents that have happened, and just ask them in small groups to go away and decide what they think should happen, and then we just let them know what our response was in those situations. But people find it really helpful because obviously it's kind of real life examples, so kind of easier to understand, I suppose.
Brilliant, thank you. That's really helpful, and actually covers a number of different drivers that you've talked about there. So even just, you know, just that induction, that training is one thing, but you've talked about how you do various different things in terms of raising awareness, in terms of response to incidents, etc. So you've, even that one idea, you can see how that will link as a change idea to a number of different drivers, and which will lead to quite a significant shift culturally, I would have hoped. Thank you. I'm going to move on to the next one now. I'll give you a chance. We've got loads of drivers here, so we want you to give a chance to sort of contribute to all of them. Informed staff with confidence to discuss sexual health and safety. Now there's a fair amount of crossover there with what we've just covered, so don't feel like you have to add more to that if you don't want to, but there may be some issues, some ideas that you've come up with that you think would fit more appropriately in that one than the previous one. No, okay, I'll move on. Now this one's one that we've talked about a fair amount in various events, trauma-informed care and sort of a trauma-informed approach. Obviously that's really fundamental to this work. We've had various events where we've talked about it. One workshop where Sal Smith and Rachel Luby talked in detail about a trauma-informed approach to sexual safety. And we've had a number of presentations from wards that have been doing some fantastic work in that regard. So I know that lots of people have been doing many things in that sense. You don't have to repeat it here if you've also shared stories with us more widely, because we'll be drawing on the information you provided in those to update the driver diagram as well. But just in terms of discussion points for today and what you might want to get out of today's session, if there's anything that you'd like to discuss today in this regard, please add it in and share with each other. So over here, somebody said that the Trust are exploring formal training to enhance existing knowledge and skills. Is that something that was based on what you'd already started on the ward, or is that just a broader idea within the Trust? I don't know who put that idea up there.
That was me. Our Trust don't actually deliver, we don't actually have trauma-informed care training as part of our core training, but that's something, because of this project, the Trust are looking at bringing that in. But a couple of our teams do use a trauma-informed care approach, and they've kindly been supporting the Trust to sort of enhance skills that because some of it's done informally anyway, it's just that we've not had formal training in that. So that's something we're looking at, but some of the, as I say, some of the staff have experience of it elsewhere and have kindly been supporting the Trust until they find a provider.
Brilliant. Well, that's fantastic that the work that you've done has then led to a broader sort of Trust policy, or the work that you've sort of been involved in. So is that something that you flagged as a need, I suppose, as a result of the work?
Yeah, absolutely, because that approach seemed to be coming up left, right and centre, and some of the members of this forum were having really good results from that, so we thought it was a real gap in our armoury, really. And funny enough, it's come in, the trauma-informed care approach has come in other projects we're working on, for instance suicide prevention and things, so it was just felt that's a real gap in our training, so that's something we're formally exploring now.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jacqueline. I think it's a really good, I suppose, advert for the kind of impact of quality improvement work. A lot of the time, that you start small with something and that you share that learning more widely, with the other people that have been involved, and then you're able to sort of actually influence quite a much broader scale level.
Funny enough, on the back of that as well, also psychology in older adults, we don't have much resource in psychology, and this project has really shown us that actually we do need some more input, so we're looking at how we can increase our psychology input in the older adult service as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing, that's really helpful. Leanne, you had your hand up, did you want to?
Hi, it's Julie. I've got Leanne and Sharon with me. Forest Close.
Hi, Leanne and Sharon.
We just wanted to say that we agree with everything that's been said in relation to trauma-informed care. and that actually we think it should be a recommendation that comes from this work, because it fits around all of our work, but specifically the more we talk to our service users, and the more they sort of open up to us about stuff like this. You know, I think 3/4 of our service users have had some sort of trauma within their background, and we think it should just be integral to mental health training, mental health nurse training. It should be just something that happens at induction, is repeated, and really it's surprising that we don't all have it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's a bit of a personal bugbear of mine as well. So I totally get your point, but I think with this work it really does get highlighted quite easily. Things like you know, in terms of the sorts of incidents that you might see and the types of behaviours you might see on a ward, which very often are just accepted as part of everyday kind of experience on a mental health ward, will have very different impacts on different people, given, you know, depending on their history and their experience and their response to the trauma that they may have suffered. So it really enhances people's ability to understand that, I think, and also to understand why somebody might feel completely differently about a particular incident to another person. And that sort of thing we're faced with that all the time with this work, aren't we? Because one person might not mind, you know, might not think much of something, and someone else may feel really quite re-traumatized by it. So we do need to keep that in mind constantly, I think. Does anyone have any other input on that subject before I move on to the next one, or any questions about any of the ideas that were put up? No, okay.
Kate, I think Patrick had his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see that. Patrick.
That's okay. Yeah, I was just really going to echo what was.
Oh, I think I've lost your sound, Patrick. Sorry.
Someone turned me off. I don't know how that happens. So that, yeah, just to say, South West London St George's, we've kind of adopted trauma-informed care as the umbrella, and to really sort of focus on the culture of introducing trauma-informed care, and to shift the culture of the trust. And then underneath that, you've got kind of sexual safety, domestic violence, safeguarding, restrictive practices, but all of that kind of sitting underneath trauma-informed care as the main kind of project that's driving it all.
Absolutely, I totally agree, and I think, you know, it really links in with the whole personalised care agenda as well. I'm seeing people for who they are and their whole, you know, their whole background and what they bring to any particular setting. So yeah, thank you. I think that's really important. So moving on then, I think at this point I sort of started to so those are the areas that I knew people were doing a lot in, and then here, you know, moving onwards, we're in sort of territory where it's sort of, I mean, we're doing lots to promote information all the time, access to resources and education. I think some of the things that we intended to maybe get more out of it over the course of the collaborative were things like multi-agency working, promoting information between agencies, looking at kind of how you were able to bring people from outside agencies in on the ward to do, you know, to talk about certain things, to help raise awareness about other means of support, etc. I think some of that was inhibited a fair amount by COVID and the pandemic, so we weren't maybe able to get quite as far with that element of the work as we might have hoped. But has anybody been able to do certain? Yeah, I know that some wards are getting people in to do some training and to build those relationships with other people and other agencies, but I don't know how much of that was able to happen over the course of the pandemic. So does anyone have anything they want to add in that or talk about particularly?
Yeah, can I come in? It's Patrick again from South West London St George's. We developed some really good links with the local sexual health services. So the local sexual health clinic would come into the wards and support our service users, and those links were really going well, but they have kind of been put on hold recently because of COVID. So yeah. We will look to re-establish that, because it was very well received by the patients and service users.
Brilliant. fantastic that you're looking to re-establish, because yeah, I know there's so many things that were put on hold, weren't they? But that's brilliant, and I can see that you have a number of other things that people are putting up here.
Hi, I wrote about professional bowel boundaries training. Sorry about the typo. We, on our project team, helpfully had the Trust's lead for social work and sexual safety, so for the whole of central and northwest London. So a lot of what was happening sort of on our two wards, concurrently, she had previously been leading on sexual safety. So there were things like professional boundaries training developed for all staff entering the Trust. So it was outside of the wards, but part of the sexual safety collaborative and things that had come up around service users and staff conversations around sexual safety then fed into the training that was rolled out across all services in the Trust.
Brilliant. That sounds really useful, and again, another example of how the work that you've done has sort of led to something much broader and much bigger than just the work on your ward. So fantastic, thank you, Sheila. That's really helpful. I'm going to move on to the next one, but stop me at any point or add anything in related to what we've talked about already. So in terms of understanding and responding to the needs of the individual, which is the primary driver, we've got a secondary driver of looking at the environment and making changes in relation to that. I'd be really interested to know what people have done in this regard, because it was something that was quite a big component of the work that we did on reducing restrictive practice prior to this sexual safety collaborative. It was very often something that people looked at was changing the environment, bringing in kind of chill out rooms, changing spaces on the ward. So for example, one of my wards on the restrictive practice collaborative had a particular part of the ward that young people used to headbang very regularly, and it caused a number of incidents where they needed to restrain people. And it was partly because it was out of sight. It didn't have sort of good lines of sight. It was quite a quiet place, and it was a kind of devoid of any stimulus in any way. And they noticed that this was something that was happening a lot, and they worked with the young people on the ward to change that space completely, and they came up with ideas about what they wanted to do, and they put they got all the young people to contribute to kind of a quote that they wrote on the wall in paint that was something along the lines of nobody likes the rain, but everybody needs, I don't know, something along the lines of look for the rainbow when it rains, that sort of thing. I can't remember the actual quote, and I really should, because I tell this story and never remember the detail of it. But it was a really sort of inspirational, lovely quote that the young people came up with themselves. They painted it on, and they all painted a handprint as a sort of collective commitment to changing the kind of meaning of that space for them, and it really did reduce the number of incidents. It didn't happen anymore in that particular place. Obviously, I'm not suggesting it didn't happen at all, but there were a number of different ideas that looked at environmental changes, and I'm just certainly thinking about the wards that I support individually. I'm not sure of that many that are being done in relation to sexual safety. So does anybody have any that they'd want to talk about or share with other people? So you talked about here access to male and female corridors to prevent accidental instances of cross area kind of. So that's a good environmental change. So and how did you do that in terms of entry access?
It's on a dementia ward, and we noticed from our Datex reporting, understandably patients couldn't always understand which corridor they needed to be in, and it was reliant on staff shutting the door or redirecting them, and we felt that was inadequate basically. So at the front of each corridor it's now a swipe access, so only staff can access those corridors or let patients in and out of those corridors.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's good. We did have a number of those sorts of changes on the reducing restricted practice as well. They had I think some wards had sort of programmed, I can't remember the name of they were like wristbands that had a sort of programmed level of access that was care planned. So there'd be certain parts of the ward that you could access depending on your care plan, depending on, you know, it was similar in some ways, but yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. And corner vision mirrors, can you tell me a bit more about that? Whoever put that idea up there, thank you.
We just placed mirrors in the corners so that you could see down a corridor if you didn't have direct vision, which just helped our young people feel a bit more safe.
Yeah.
Some of our buildings aren't sort of built for purpose, so they're in very old buildings and therefore the environment doesn't really lend itself.
Sure. Absolutely. Thank you. And a diversity board. Does anyone want to say a bit more about that? Because
sorry, Kate, that was me again. So we just had the young people create a diversity board just to kind of help them kind of value each other's kind of sexual preferences and just really kind of promote a sort of understanding, also kind of a list of resources on there as well. And we've got our sexual safety charter within that as well.
That's brilliant. Was that in response to something you'd sort of noticed as part of this work, or was it just that in terms of feedback that you've been given, or was it just an idea that came from someone?
It was something we were in the process of doing anyway, but it just because we work with a lot of young people who are kind of transgender, but as part of this program as well, then we obviously did put our safety charter on there as well, which the young people wrote. So it's just been really helpful.
Yeah, it sounds really helpful. I think it's an idea I've not heard a lot of people doing that much with, so I think that sounds a really good idea, and an easy way to sort of, yeah, just promote inclusivity, etc. Brilliant. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next one. I want to try and make sure we get through it all. And as I said, yeah, I'll look at whether we can get to the next subject. So psychological safety. Now, this is again something I have a bit of a personal bugbear on, or just sort of personal crusade. But it's really important. Obviously, it's really important not just for this work, but for any work in any setting with mental health, but particularly, you know, the hospital-based setting or inpatient unit. It's important for both staff and patients, obviously, and I think it's a huge topic. It's a really big area, so I would imagine that lots and lots of what you've talked about already fits under the umbrella of psychological safety. I mean, in a sense, that's what we're trying to create through all of these change ideas in some way or another. Create an environment where people feel able to share their experiences, feel able to talk openly about their kind of situation and their experience. So I don't know whether you feel you've got anything different to add under that umbrella, or whether there's anything specific to psychological safety that you've actually tried to do, maybe in terms of training with psychologists, or I don't know. Not a lot coming up on that one, but I'm going to take that to mean that pretty much everything fits under the umbrella to some extent, I hope. But yeah, it's a big area. I think everything.
Sorry, I had one. It's just not going in.
Sorry, what do you want to? Oh, that's it. Maybe there's a bit of a delay. Sorry.
That's not mine.
Oh, it's not. Okay. Do you want to tell me what yours is? Sorry, Sheila.
Yeah, it's again, it's tied into kind of an existing project. So the trauma-informed approaches that we kind of rolled out across CNWL acute services started with the wards in Harrow. And one of the things around psychological safety is that we've got a thing called a stabilisation manual. Kind of looks like this, and there's all workbooks which we created, again, are produced with service users around the immediate kind of stabilisation work, which is the kind of trauma-informed care, which happens on the acute wards. And so part of that work, there's leaflets, there's booklets on each bit, but a lot of it is around promoting psychological safety. So there's things like kind of self-compassion, soothing and safety specifically. So these are all kind of booklets around what it is, and then exercises, evidence-based ways of promoting psychological safety in various ways.
Sounds really helpful, and I'm anticipating loads of people asking whether you can share any of that information.
Yeah, and it's all on the CNWL Trust website, so I'll share that link.
Thank you, Sheena, that's really, really helpful. Yeah, brilliant. Helen, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. Hello, everybody. I'm Helen. I'm the clinical advisor to the Safety Improvement Programme. So I have the joy of just listening to all the wonderful work that you've been doing around sexual safety. But I suppose I like Kate, I'm very interested in psychological safety, because if you don't have psychological safety, it's actually quite hard to improve anything. And actually, when I listen to all of you talking about all the wonderful work you're doing, a lot of the stuff that you're doing where you're really opening up the environment and creating these conversations where staff and where the young people or the any of the people using your services are talking about sex and sexual safety, you are automatically beginning to improve and increase the sexual safety on your ward. So a really important area. But as Kate said, I think just wanted to support what you were saying, Kate, that actually lots of the stuff you're doing by just opening up this conversation, which is often a difficult conversation for people to have, and really listening to people, you'll all be increasing the psychological safety in your environments.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Helen. Jacqueline.
Yeah, just echoing that really. I think this was the biggest area for us, because it was very apparent early on that our staff, this is on a dementia ward, our staff didn't really register sexual safety as an issue, and it was getting them to understand the psychological impact it might be having on them and on our patients. So I think that was our starting point, and it's been the overarching drive of the project, is supporting staff to understand sexual safety and the impact it has.
I completely agree, and I think just sort of building on that, and I might have mentioned this at previous events that we've had as well, but you know, the recent report that came out, I think it was through Ofsted, they looked at schools and sexual harassment in schools, and the number of young people, young girls in schools who feel or don't feel sexually safe effectively and feel that they suffer sexual harassment. And I have a 13-year-old daughter and just about to go into year 9. And I think I've mentioned before, but she saw our operational definitions for this work and she was shocked. She said, "Is that really sexual harassment?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "That I experience that every day in school or online in some form or another." And she's 13, and that's, it doesn't surprise me that whether something like 90% of young people sort of said that this was something they experienced. And I think it's very much that idea that safety, the feeling we have about what's appropriate and what's not appropriate, that culture around this is completely distorted for so many people. If they're growing up with that in schools and in mental health settings, you know, when you're looking at some of the spectrum of difficulty and you know, challenging behaviour that you deal with, that there is a real sort of acceptance that this is just something that happens as part of my job, or this is just something that happens as part of this particular mental illness, and that's not necessarily the case. But even if it is the case, it's something that we can deal with differently. It's something that we can try to change in the way that we think about it, the way that we address it. So, and that's what we've been doing very much so as part of this work. And I think we really have had to start from a position of well, a very raw, sort of primitive, if you like, position with that, because it's just so new to everybody to be thinking this way. So I really, whenever I talk about this, I really want everyone to keep hold of that when they think about the work they've done on this programme, because I know so many of you won't have seen changes in your data or whatever, but to keep hold of how groundbreaking that work is in terms of that cultural shift is so important. So I'm going to move on so in terms of, again, improving culture, supporting change and quality improvement. Again, I think this is something where people may not automatically think, oh, I've done this around that, or I've done this, but actually everything you've done as part of this work is about that. You're creating the conditions. We've heard from Forest Close a number of times, haven't we, about the work that they've done and how they created the conditions for this change to take place and supported the quality improvement process and approach by, you know, and you'll have all done this in some way or another. You set up your project teams, you set up your weekly or fortnightly meetings to discuss the work. You've kind of acted on it in terms of PDSA cycles, etc. You've done all of that. So those are the things that you should be putting into this kind of category in terms of thinking about the work that you've done and your driver diagrams. But yeah, it's about creating those conditions and seeing that, you know, you by bringing people into the kind of the project and involving them and giving people autonomy to act, you've done a huge amount in that regard. So does anyone want to add anything in particular that they have noted under that driver? So yeah, somebody's put in there looking at taking the change ideas to other CAMHS wards and adapting it for children's units. And yeah, that again, that's an area that we've looked at, haven't we, across the collaborative, is the adaptation of the work for different types of settings. So Jacqueline has talked a bit about dementia wards, we've talked a bit about CAMHS wards, we've also got learning disability wards on the programme, and I think all of that needs a bit of thinking differently, doesn't it? It's not all one size fits all for everybody, but you've done a huge amount, I think, differently about that, easy read, etc. We've heard lots of fantastic ideas from Moore Ward and Nelft, who did lots of social story stuff with the patients with learning disabilities. And yeah, talking there about how you spread the work that you're doing. So rolled out a charter to all inpatient services, etc. And I know a number of wards have been thinking much more broadly about how they share their learning within their trusts. So thank you. And then learning from incidents and good practice. Now, this is something that we've talked a bit about in other events, things that you might be doing differently as a result of this work, ways that you're reacting to incidents different, or responding to incidents differently. We actually had somebody from a trust outside of the collaborative share some learning they'd done as a result of a serious incident in terms of this work, and sort of thinking about how they'd sort of done something very different in terms of their observations and things because of something that happened, and that was, they thought that would sort of feed into this work as well. And I know that that's the case for a number of wards. Does anybody have anything in particular they want to share on that? I know that you've talked a bit about this already to some extent, changes, I was just about to say, and then it popped up on the screen, changes to incident reporting systems and datics, etc., and introducing things into daily huddles, that kind of thing. So that's all very positive. And easy to lose sight of them because they're small changes, but actually they make a big difference to the culture. Improving staff visibility and availability. Again, that was something that was quite a big focus for people on the Reducing Restriction Practice Collaborative for obvious reasons, but I'm not sure I'm as familiar with that many things that are happening in that regard on this collaborative, so it'd be good to have anybody's input on that if you are doing things around that. Can someone say a bit more about the sexual safety champions that you've just put on there? It would be
yeah.
Thank you.
So we identified sexual safety champions. I'm loath to have another champion for another thing, but this one we did because I think it was my project. We identified sexual safety champions on each of the wards, and they would be the ones to collect the data. But also what they did was became kind of really quite confident and good at then following through the work with the staff on shift, and also with individuals, with service users who have particular concerns around sexual safety, or about whom there were concerns regarding their own behaviour and being of kind of sexual risk to others on the ward. And so that really did help with there being a known person on the ward. Mm-hmm. The other thing that we did with the sexual safety charter was, although the name changed a few times in the course of the collaborative, we had our very first telephone call to the named person to talk to, if you didn't feel able to talk to anybody on the ward about anything of concern regarding sexual safety. So there were just two things.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you very much. That's very helpful. I think it does help. Anything that sort of addresses issues around continuity of care, feeling they've got somebody they can talk to that will actually follow through on the things that they raise. I think that those are really sort of important aspects to this work. I know sorry, you mentioned another couple of ideas on that board as well, but things like improved visible nurse system to ensure staff members always in the communal area, and staff members in bedroom corridors during night shifts. I know other wards have also looked at kind of the gender sort of split of staff on wards, if depending on what patients they have at the time, and making sure they've got people of the same gender on observations rather than the opposite gender, for example. So yeah, things like that are all really important. Thank you. And then we've got co-produced staff training. So we have talked a lot about staff training across the collaborative and other events. I know there are a number of wards been doing things in that regard. I think I'd be really interested to hear who's sort of done much in the way of co-produced training, whether you've got anybody actually doing any sort of where you've got patients involved in that process. Or whether you've been able to. I know up our ward in Kent and Medway, and Amanda, I think you're on the call today. I'm not suggesting you've actually been involved in training, but just the fact that you've been so present throughout the course of the work that Openness have done. And hello, nice to see you. And really sort of had continuous input into all of their change ideas, and the work that they've done has been massively helpful. So I wondered whether other people have been able to achieve some of that as well. It's not always easy for everybody. Okay, we'll move on. I know that there are wards doing things with it. It's just maybe not on the call today. Right, and then reflection and supervision for staff. I think we've covered some of this to some extent, where we talked about, openness to talk about things. There were a number of ideas that you contributed in those boards that were related to supervision or related to reflective practice, or bringing things into one-to-one meetings. So you may not feel that you want to add anything more at this point here, but if anybody does want to share anything further, please do. Okay, and then here we've got collaborate with other organisations as the primary driver, and then we've got shared understanding of the system response. So again, that's sort of, we touched on this a little earlier, where we talked about the kind of the responses to incidents, but also the whether you've been able really to sort of focus on those relationship building kind of change ideas that mean working with other agencies, etc. I know that's been harder over the course of the last sort of 18 months, but you may you may have things that you've been doing differently other than what we've already discussed, which is sort of, you know, links with local sexual health organisations or sexual safety you know, advocacy agencies. Somebody's in conversation with what's NRLS? Sorry,
sorry, that's the National Reporting and Learning System. It's where all the incident reports get submitted nationally.
Brilliant. So, okay, so that's just re kind of categorising to some extent, I suppose. Is that what you mean?
Well, what we've established is certain incidents. So, for instance, an unexpected death is classed as a patient safety incident, and there's been some discussion as to whether, for instance, a patient removing their clothes, is that a patient safety incident or not? So we've been trying to establish what other trusts are categorising these incidents as, and whether the national reporting system, whether it sees them as patient safety incidents, because we need some consistency moving forward with this.
Absolutely, yeah, that's a really interesting point. Actually, it may be something that I suppose it might be something that we take further, but on the learning from the whole collaborative, you know, that may be part of that conversation, I guess. Brilliant, thank you. I think we're nearing the end. I hope it's just a never-ending list of secondary drivers. Multi-agency working, we've touched on that already. I won't linger on it too long, but obviously you can add still to these. If things come to mind after we've moved on, then you can still add to the other slides. And response to sexual safety incidents where the responder has adequate time and skills. So again, that would be around training, I suppose, ensuring that people have provided with the time to respond appropriately and to deal with different people, you know, work with the various people, whether that's people that will witness something or people that have experienced something. Please add anything or stick your hand up if you've got something to say on any of these particular points. And then support for all parties involved. Again, that's, as I just sort of mentioned, it's not necessarily just the people who are involved in the incident directly, but the anybody who may have witnessed something, which can be very difficult for people as well as being directly involved. Again, I think we've talked a bit before in previous events about guidance and flowcharts and things that might be helpful in terms of understanding the sort of step-by-step response that people might want to make to an incident. And we've had some resources shared around that, so there will be things on the website, I think, in regards to that. But again, it might be something you're developing further and looking at more, so please add that in, or feel free to shout out if you're doing so. And then things like using data to promote learning. Again, that's a really key kind of aspect of quality improvement work, and we'll have been encouraging you to do that throughout the course of the collaborative. So the way that you look at the data that you collect as a result of the postcards, the information that you get from those, and how you then bring that into your quality improvement meetings where you're reviewing consistently the information that tells you. So if things are, if people are feeling unsafe on a ward, what does that tell you about what's going on at the ward at that particular moment? What kind of incidences are you seeing, etc. And yeah, thank you. So ideas that coming up of including data on sexual safety in board reports, etc. So really making that data work for you in terms of understanding how you see the issues that you're dealing with them is quite important. And it's not always straightforward, but it can be really helpful and exciting when you see how much of a difference it makes. And then again, accurate and timely data collection, again, something we've been pushing throughout the collaborative as much as we can. Things have been challenging in that regard, but obviously I think you've been doing loads. So obviously the postcards are one aspect, but then there's also there's questionnaires that I know a number of people have done, staff questionnaires, feedback, etc. There's also changes to your incident reporting systems, data, etc. So there'll be lots of ideas that you can add to that driver as well. And then finally, we have got a blank slide here where you could add anything that you don't think has been covered by any of these drivers. So if you think there's something that you have been doing that I haven't kind of covered with any of those millions of drivers we've just been through, please feel free to add them on here, or we'll talk now about those. I've run over and I didn't talk specifically or separately about the changes or the sort of positive changes being, but I was hoping that that was kind of covered through the discussion of the work that we've just done together, going through the secondary drivers and thinking about the impact of those changes on the ward and the culture, etc. So we will be getting you to think a little bit more about that anyway at the final learning set, when we sort of pull together everything that everybody's been doing over the course of the last, well, it's been longer than 18 months, been nearly 2 years, hasn't it? So I don't have a huge amount more. Oh, and thank you, Christy, for posting in the chat that if you wanted to add any more detail or any change ideas that you didn't get a chance to add onto those slides, then please feel free to use this form where you can add in a bit more. But what we'll do, we'll pull together everything that you've added on so far today. We'll also look at the final output, storyboards, posters and templates and things that you've been putting together for us. Thank you to those that have already sent theirs through. We'll pull out the change ideas that you've put into those as well and add those to any updated version of our sort of overarching theory of change for this work. It's been really helpful for us, and I hope it's been helpful for you to hear about so much of the work that people have been doing. I think it's always useful to be sharing that together. And I will let you get on with your day if there's nothing more to add.